Hey everyone. Tonight we're drifting back to a time when the seas were full of adventure, danger, and of course, a level of filth that makes even the laziest modern college dormitory look like a spa. So, dim the lights, curl up, and let's quietly sail towards some of history's grimiest, stinkiest corners without even leaving your bed. Pirate life has always carried a romantic aura, thanks to books, films, and, naturally, rum-soaked daydreams. But if we strip away the fanciful tales of buried treasure, flamboyant hats, and melodramatic duels, we find a life that was mostly uncomfortable, disease-ridden, and occasionally tragic in ways that are almost too tedious to truly thrill anyone. And that, in the end, is perfect for bedtime history. Because we're not here for excitement tonight. We're here for quiet, for slow, for letting the absurdity of historical misery gently lull you into sleep. Now, pirates were not just swashbuckling renegades. They were also people who had somehow managed to combine extreme risk-taking with a remarkable talent for turning their own lives into a slow-moving disaster. Imagine a tiny wooden ship, barely floating, with a crew that had not bathed in weeks, months in some cases, and the nearest port overrun with disease and rotten food. Imagine yourself on that vessel, learning that provisions often meant a lump of hard biscuit, some salted meat, and perhaps a few scrawny legumes if you were lucky. The smell alone could knock you unconscious. And yet, somehow, humans thrived, or at least survived, in these conditions. Not comfortably, of course, but just barely enough to continue plotting raids, arguing over treasure shares, or performing occasional mutiny when someone's hammock became a breeding ground for lice. Life on a pirate ship was noisy in the wrong ways. The creaking timbers, the gulls overhead, the occasional cannon shot, and the ever-present background of coughing, groaning, and grumbling men whose hygiene was, generously speaking, aspirational at best. One can almost admire the efficiency with which they combined sheer incompetence with occasional bursts of genius. For example, pirates had surprisingly detailed codes governing everything from treasure division to punishment. It's just that those codes existed in parallel with a complete inability to maintain personal cleanliness or prevent rampant scurvy. Speaking of scurvy, it was everywhere. Fresh fruits and vegetables were a luxury few could ever hope to taste on long voyages. Without vitamin C, sailors' gums rotted, their teeth fell out, and eventually their legs would swell grotesquely. But pirates, naturally, had the solution, drinking more rum. And so, while a man might be slowly dying from preventable disease, he could at least feel cheerful while doing it. Food itself was a daily reminder that life on a pirate ship was not just dangerous, but also unpleasantly creative. Hardtack, those rock-hard biscuits that could double as bludgeons, were often infested with weevils. Salted meat might be rancid, moldy, or crawling with maggots. And fresh water, if you could find it, tasted faintly of whatever had sloshed in the barrel for weeks. Imagine drinking that slowly as the sun sets, and tell me that's not a good recipe for a sleepy evening story. It wasn't just the food or the smell. Pirate ships were tight, cramped spaces, with hammocks slung close together like sardines in a tin. Sleeping arrangements were dictated less by comfort than by rank, or, in some cases, by sheer luck. You might end up with a hammock right next to the bilge, where the water slowly leaked in, bringing with a pungent mixture of mold, rot, and whatever had fallen overboard in the past fortnight. Privacy was non-existent, and personal space was a concept long since surrendered to necessity. And yet, life had routines. Morning watches, cleaning decks, sharpening cutlasses, and occasionally firing cannons. These routines were not soothing or efficient. They were exhausting and repetitive, but they gave a semblance of order to the chaos. Pirates were also surprisingly particular about certain things. A ship might be filthy, yes, but someone would notice that the powder magazine wasn't properly organized, or the captain's hat had creases in the wrong places. It's a little comforting, in a grim sort of way, to know that even in utter misery, humans cling to rituals. Then there were the injuries. Every cut, bruise, or burn hand was a lesson in minimal medical care. Doctors, if present, had knowledge that was more superstition than science. Amputations were common for severe wounds. Infections were expected, and gangrene was simply a polite way of saying someone might not make it through the night. Imagine drifting off to sleep with the knowledge that the men around you are quietly suffering in ways that modern medicine would instantly fix. It's the sort of grim, slow-moving reality that somehow makes bedtime storytelling oddly soothing. The social life of a pirate ship was another peculiar blend of camaraderie and chaos. Arguments over stolen treasure, leadership disputes, and petty jealousies were daily entertainment. Some captains tried to enforce fairness with rules and strict codes. Others relied on intimidation and drunken threats. And almost everyone, at some point, secretly wished they could be anywhere else. Yet, they stayed because the alternative civilian life, taxes, boring work, was somehow even worse. Mutiny was a constant threat, of course. The pirate democracy was fragile, maintained by a combination of shared interests and mutual dread. If a captain overstepped, the crew would gather quietly, whisper, and vote him off, or worse. And when a mutiny failed, the consequences were unpleasant, if not deadly. But oddly, this constant low-level tension contributed to the overall sleepiness of life aboard ship. There was always something happening, but it was repetitive, predictable, and unpleasant enough to make your eyelids droop. Even leisure time was peculiar. Music, dancing, and storytelling existed, yes, but in the context of damp, cramped quarters and bodies that smelled strongly of salt, sweat, and whatever the last meal had been. Tales of adventure were mixed with complaints about rations and injuries. It was a slow, grinding mix of pleasure and misery, like slowly listening to someone describe a tedious but slightly interesting dream over and over again. Pirates also had their odd little superstitions. Hanging a monkey's paw, carrying a rabbit's foot, or swearing never to sail on a Friday. Some of these rituals were meant to ward off death, some to curry favor with luck, and some simply because someone had a bizarre personal obsession. None of them worked, but they gave a little structure to a life otherwise dominated by the sea, disease, and general discomfort. And speaking of discomfort, let's not forget the lice. Imagine sitting in a hammock, trying to nap, while hundreds of tiny creatures crawled over your skin, sharing your hair, and generally enjoying themselves far more than you ever could. Scratching was inevitable. It didn't help that bathing was rare, clothing rarely washed, and the entire crew shared bedding, hammocks, and occasionally rats. The personal hygiene of a pirate ship, in a word, was astonishingly poor. Pirates weren't immune to boredom either. Days on the ocean could stretch endlessly. Sun, wind, and the same horizon day after day. The endless monotony was broken only by occasional raids, arguments, or injuries. And when boredom became intense, tempers flared. Fights broke out over trivial matters, often leading to bruises, broken bones, or the occasional unfortunate fall overboard. Now, you might wonder how anyone survived this lifestyle. And the answer is simple. Low expectations, fatalism, and perhaps a hint of denial. A pirate accepted that life was hard, dirty, and unpleasant, but they also accepted the thrill of minor victories. Finding a ship to raid, getting a decent meal, or simply surviving another day. It's a sort of quiet endurance, not particularly glamorous, but steady enough to get through the night. And so, as the sun sets over the rolling waves and the tiny vessel creaks beneath the weight of damp sails and weary sailors, you can imagine the quiet, slow-moving misery of pirate life. The smell, the noise, the discomfort, all part of a rhythm that would eventually lull you, if you were on board, to a state of resigned calm. What would you have done, trapped in such conditions, with lice in your hair, maggots in your biscuit, and the endless horizon staring back at you? Tell me in the comments, softly, if you'd have lasted a week, a month, or perhaps traded it all for a quiet life on land. So, if you've settled in and are comfortable, let's drift onward to the daily rhythms aboard a pirate ship, which were at once mundane, exhausting, and occasionally horrifying ways that modern life has mercifully spared us. Picture yourself swaying gently with the ship, the wooden deck creaking beneath your feet. Or, if you claimed a hammock, gently rocking above the same unpleasant smells. There's a rhythm here, a repetitive cycle of tasks, complaints, and minor disasters. And it is perfectly suited for a calm evening of reflection or sleep. Mornings on a pirate ship were rarely gentle. The sun would rise, casting a pale light across the deck, and the crew would be roused by the creak of timbers, the barking of gulls, and the occasional sharp call of the boatswain. Some captains preferred to rouse their crew with shouts, others with a gentle tap of a stick, and some, naturally, did nothing at all, leaving sailors to slowly awaken in a fog of sleep, hungover rum, and general discomfort. Breakfast, if one could call it that, consisted of hard biscuits, salty meat, and whatever water hadn't turned rancid in the barrel. Sometimes, the biscuits contained the occasional surprise, a weevil or two, which, in a way, were the ship's unofficial mascots. After breakfast came work, and work was endless. Cleaning the deck, repairing sails, checking rigging, and polishing cutlasses. It sounds reasonably productive until you remember that every piece of wood was wet or rotting, the ropes were frayed, and the sails were patchy and threadbare. Every task had to be repeated endlessly because the sea had a way of undoing all effort almost immediately. You might sweep the deck in the morning, only to find it sticky and sandy by noon. And naturally, this was all done while avoiding a stray cannonball or a particularly bad fall overboard. Pirates, despite their reputation for lawlessness, had surprisingly rigid routines. There were watches, shifts to ensure someone was always on the lookout, and designated responsibilities for each crew member. Of course, the rules were enforced inconsistently, and discipline often depended on the captain's mood. Some captains enforced order with draconian precision, making a small error feel like catastrophe. Others relied on threats, drunken intimidation, or, occasionally, charm. Though charm is probably the wrong word for a man covered in filth, missing teeth, and smelling faintly of rotten fish. Food, as ever, was a constant source of mild panic and gentle despair. Salted meat might be soft enough to eat one day and rock hard the next. Hardtack could be used as a weapon, a substitute for a pillow, or, if luck was particularly cruel, both at the same time. Freshwater barrels often developed a film of something unpleasant, and spoiled water was a serious threat. Pirates, it seems, were remarkably skilled at ignoring problems until they became absolutely unavoidable. Hygiene was predictably non-existent. Bathing was rare, occurring only when a ship was near land or a particularly conscientious crew member suggested it. Lice, fleas, and other small insects were constant companions. Clothing was seldom washed, and hammocks served as both beds and personal storage units, attracting a variety of unpleasant pests. One can almost admire the sheer resilience required to tolerate such conditions day after day, week after week. Pirates were also prone to small-scale disasters that were, from a modern perspective, almost charming in their absurdity. A rope could snap, a mast could crack, or a cannon could misfire. Every day brought minor injuries, bruises, cuts, burned hands, that were treated with a mixture of superstition, alcohol, and minimal medical knowledge. If an injury became severe, amputation might be the only solution, performed with precision that was both horrifying and, in its way, admirable. Social dynamics added another layer of slow-moving tension. Crews were composed of men from all walks of life, often forced together in close quarters. Disputes over treasure, rank, or the captain's decisions were constant. Arguments could escalate to fights, which often ended with a bruised ego, a broken limb, or someone unceremoniously tossed overboard. Mutiny was a real threat, though rarely executed cleanly. The combination of boredom, close quarters, and easy access to weapons made the social atmosphere simultaneously fragile and absurdly volatile. Pirate superstitions were another constant presence. Sailors were meticulous about avoiding certain actions believed to bring bad luck. Stepping on a ladder, whistling, sailing on particular days, or, naturally, angering the gods of sea. Some captains encouraged these rituals. Others tolerated them because, well, superstition was cheaper than a mutiny. The rituals themselves were often elaborate, bizarre, or completely ineffective, but they provided a small comfort, a sense of control in an otherwise chaotic environment. And then there was sleep, or what passed for sleep. Hammocks offered little comfort, suspended above creaking timbers and the smell of wet clothing. Men often slept fully clothed, boots and all, in a posture designed more for practicality than relaxation. Sleep was intermittent, punctuated by the demands of watches, bad weather, and the occasional screaming gull. Yet, somehow, the human body adapted, finding small, fleeting pockets of rest amidst the chaos. Leisure, when it occurred, was subdued. Music, storytelling, and quiet games provided minor relief from the monotony of work and the omnipresent threat of injury. Pirates could be surprisingly creative, making instruments from barrels, strings, and scraps of metal. Storytelling often revolved around minor personal triumphs, exaggerations of previous raids, or complaints about the discomforts of daily life. These moments were brief, gentle lulls, easily drifting into the low hum of boredom and fatigue. Pirates' personal habits were, unsurprisingly, eccentric. Some were meticulous about small, trivial matters, keeping a cutlass polished, arranging personal belongings with obsessive precision. Others were completely indifferent, leaving belongings to rot in the corners of the ship. The combination of extreme diligence and utter disregard created an environment that was simultaneously chaotic and oddly predictable. Even the concept of health was peculiar. Illnesses were rampant, often treated with remedies that ranged from mildly helpful to absurdly ineffective. Scurvy, dysentery, and infections were commonplace. Remedies included citrus fruit if available, various alcoholic concoctions, and sometimes mystical rituals that were supposed to ward off disease. The results were variable, but the effort at least was sincere. Weather was another constant companion. Storms would appear suddenly, turning a small, damp vessel into a rolling, pitching nightmare. Sails would tear, ropes would snap, and the crew would scramble to keep the ship afloat. Minor storms were annoying. Major storms could be fatal. Yet, for all the danger, there was a strange, hypnotic quality to watching waves crash against the hull, to listening to wind and rain in endless monotony. It's easy to imagine, in such moments, drifting slowly into a calm, almost meditative state. Pirates also had an interesting relationship with treasure. The promise of gold, silver, and other valuables kept morale from sinking completely. Yet treasure was often less exciting than imagined. It required division, led to disputes, and could vanish as quickly as it appeared. The pursuit of wealth, combined with the discomfort of daily life, created a rhythm of mild hope and gentle despair, perfect for a drowsy, reflective evening. And so, as the day draws on and the sun slowly sinks below the horizon, we find a crew of men, tired, dirty, and slightly miserable, slowly settling into the gentle patterns of the evening. The ship rocks softly, sails flap in the wind, and the smell of salt, sweat, and decaying food drifts lazily through the air. It's an environment both oppressive and strangely comforting, a rhythm of life that lulls both body and mind into quiet reflection. Would you have tolerated the endless routine, the discomfort, and the minor disasters night after night? Or would you have mutinied, abandoned ship, and sought some slightly less miserable life on land? You can tell me softly in the comments, imagining yourself among the hammocks, the rats, and the constant, gentle creaking of the deck. If you've been comfortably swaying with the rhythm of the ship so far, let's now drift a little closer to the people themselves, the men and occasionally women, though rarely, who made pirate life both chaotic and strangely predictable. Because while the ship's creaking timbers, foul smells, and unrelenting monotony are enough to lull anyone into a relaxed state, it's the human element, the small quirks, petty arguments, and minor disasters, that really colors life at sea. Every pirate ship had its characters. Some were dreamers, constantly envisioning the next raid, the next pile of gold, or the next daring escape from some overzealous Navy vessel. Others were practical, begrudgingly doing the work required to keep the ship afloat, yet often muttering under their breath about the stupidity of it all. And some, naturally, were miserable, bored, or plain unpleasant. The combination of these personalities created a slow, simmering tension that was both mildly amusing and endlessly exhausting. Take, for example, the first mate, a position of authority just below the captain. Some first mates were meticulous organizers, keeping logs, checking provisions, and enforcing discipline with a weary patience that was almost admirable. Others were lazy, drunk, or overly fond of violence. Imagine being woken from a half-sleep to the frustrated shouting of a first mate who just discovered that someone had spilled the salted meat again, or that the hammocks were not aligned perfectly. Small disasters like these, repeated daily, created a general rhythm of irritation, barely loud enough to be stimulating, yet just enough to keep the mind occupied. The captain, of course, was a figure both revered and quietly feared. Some captains ruled with strict fairness, distributing plunder according to written codes, listening to grievances, and occasionally performing minor acts of kindness, though naturally, they were mostly accidental. Others were capricious, cruel, or completely incompetent. One can imagine a captain standing proudly at the helm, hat askew, staring at the horizon with a faintly confused expression, convinced that his decisions were brilliant, while the crew quietly plots how to survive his mismanagement. Among the crew, rivalries were common. Arguments over treasure shares, personal slights, or the last decent biscuit could escalate into full-blown fights. Injuries were frequent, but rarely fatal. A broken nose, a black eye, or a sprained wrist became part of the slow-moving tapestry of daily life. Pirates were, in a way, resilient creatures, conditioned by discomfort to shrug off minor pain, minor injury, and the general unpleasantness of their environment. Yet for all the complaints, disputes, and occasional mutinies, there was a sense of camaraderie, shared misery as a way of bonding people. Even when everyone smells faintly of salt, sweat, and rotting food, pirates would share stories, trade small comforts, and occasionally help one another through illness or injury. These small acts of kindness were rare, fleeting, but somehow enough to prevent complete despair. The hierarchy aboard ship was a delicate balance. Rank mattered, though competence was less important than charisma, fear, or sheer luck. The quartermaster often held power equal to the captain, in a practical sense, because he controlled supplies and food distribution. This sometimes led to minor standoffs, a captain demanding obedience, a quartermaster threatening with slow starvation, and a crew quietly trying not to be noticed by either party. The slow-moving tension created a rhythm that, while stressful in the moment, becomes oddly hypnotic when described softly in a calm voice at the end of the day. Pirate women, though rare, added another layer of complexity. When present, they were treated with a mix of admiration, suspicion, and resentment. Some were competent sailors, capable of navigating, repairing sails, and even commanding small raiding parties. Others were there for charm or distraction, which, naturally, led to jealousy and small quarrels among the men. Their presence, brief and often fleeting, added drama to the otherwise monotonous daily life, yet never truly disrupted the overall rhythm. Disease remained a constant, insidious companion. Scurvy, dysentery, typhus, and other illnesses moved silently through the crew. Remedies were, at best, rudimentary. A touch of citrus, a spoonful of some strange herbal concoction, or a large quantity of rum were the usual solutions. The result was a slow, creeping sense of physical decline among many crew members, which, in turn, added to the general lethargy that made sleep and reflection particularly welcome. Injuries, too, were a near-daily occurrence. Rope burns, bruised limbs, and smashed fingers were treated with a mixture of alcohol, superstition, and grim resignation. More serious injuries, like deep cuts or broken bones, often meant an improvised form of surgery performed by someone with no real medical training, occasionally with catastrophic results. And yet, the routine continued. Work, small conflicts, minor injuries, rest, repeat. This predictability, even when tinged with misery, was calming in a strange, hypnotic way. Pirates were also prone to eccentric habits. Some obsessed over cleanliness in small, absurd ways, polishing cutlasses or arranging hammocks with ritual precision. Others embraced chaos completely, leaving clothing, tools, and food scraps scattered around the ship. These contrasting personalities created a gentle, ongoing drama that was more about routine annoyance than true excitement. Ideal material for a sleepy historical monologue. Weather, as always, played its slow, unrelenting part. Sun, wind, and rain dictated the rhythm of work and rest. Storms were a particular form of slow torture. Sails torn, ropes snapping, waves crashing over the deck. Even minor storms required vigilance, exhausting work, and constant adjustment. And yet, as we'd noted, the sound of wind and rain, the slow rocking of the ship, and the constant low-level tension all contribute to a hypnotic lull, perfect for easing the mind towards sleep. Small personal victories, when they occurred, were celebrated quietly. A successful raid, a fair division of plunder, or even a minor repair done correctly could spark subdued cheer. These moments were fleeting, gentle interruptions in the ongoing monotony, reminding the crew briefly that life, despite its discomforts, contained tiny rewards. Nighttime aboard a pirate ship was, in its way, both worse and better than the day. Darkness amplified the smells, the creaks of the timbers, and the sensation of confinement. Sleep was interrupted by watches, arguments, or the occasional nocturnal accident. Yet, for those who found a comfortable spot, there was also the gentle sway of the ship, the distant sound of waves, and the soft rhythm of human activity, a lullaby of sorts, if you could ignore the occasional curse or scream. Pirates' superstitions continued to guide behavior. Avoiding certain actions, carrying charms, or performing rituals before sailing offered comfort, however illusory. The rituals themselves often seemed absurd, but they provided predictable structure to an otherwise chaotic existence. And humans, as always, crave structure, even the most unpleasant of circumstances. So, as the ship rocks gently, the crew settles into hammocks, and the smells of the day begin to fade only slightly, we can appreciate the slow, steady rhythms of life at sea. The petty arguments, minor injuries, eccentric personalities, and small disasters all create a tapestry of low-energy chaos that is, oddly, quite soothing when recounted softly. If you were aboard this ship, which personality would you have been? The grumpy first mate, the eccentric captain, or the quiet sailor trying to survive another day? Drift into the comments and imagine yourself there, among the hammocks, the smell of salt and the ever-present hint of disaster, and share your thoughts softly. If you're comfortably settled, let's now drift a little closer to moments when pirate life briefly becomes, well, somewhat dramatic, though still exhausting, tedious, and oddly hypnotic. Because while the daily routines, petty arguments, and constant discomfort are enough to lull almost anyone into a gentle stupor, occasional raids, disputes, and mishaps add a slow-moving tension that can be oddly soothing when described in a calm, measured voice. Raids were naturally a highlight of pirate life, or as close as you could get to excitement without introducing actual comfort or hygiene. Ships were spotted on the horizon, plans were whispered, and men slowly, methodically prepared for action. Of course, preparation was a process as tedious as it was chaotic. Cannons needed polishing, cutlasses sharpened, sails adjusted, and everyone reminded repeatedly to keep their boots on, because, naturally, someone would forget, leading to minor accidents that might include bruised shins, stubbed toes, or the occasional unfortunate spill overboard. The act of boarding another ship was rarely the thrilling cinematic moment that novels might suggest. Instead, it involved climbing wet ropes, balancing on slippery planks, and carefully avoiding sharp edges, all while trying not to look weak in front of your equally exhausted peers. Fights broke out, not necessarily strategic or even interesting, but chaotic, noisy, and slightly painful. Some pirates were brave, others clumsy, and a few were just accidentally in the way, tripping over crates or sliding into a fellow sailor. Treasure, when found, was a mixture of excitement and administrative nightmare. Loot had to be counted, divided, and stashed, all while avoiding arguments, minor fights, or accusations of cheating. A gold coin might lead to whispers, a dropped gem to a brawl, and a spilled sack of silver to a minor mutiny. And so, what might appear from a distance as adventure was often a slow, grinding negotiation over minutiae, punctuated by exhaustion, minor injuries, and general foul smells. Mutinies were another predictable feature of life aboard ship. They rarely occurred out of sheer heroism or daring. Instead, they were slow, creeping affairs, fueled by petty grievances, boredom, and occasionally bad weather. A captain might offend someone by insisting the hammocks be arranged in particular order, or a quartermaster might be perceived as hoarding food. Slowly, whispers circulated. Plans were quietly made, and everyone involved took care to avoid the attention of the more vigilant crew. When the mutiny finally erupted, it was often clumsy, disorganized, and mildly amusing in retrospect, though distressing in the moment. Even when mutinies failed, the aftermath was a slow-moving comedy of punishment. Sailors might be confined, denied rations, or assigned the most unpleasant chores imaginable. Sometimes, a particularly clumsy sailor would be tied to a post during a minor storm, left to contemplate the subtle absurdity of both his actions and his discomfort. The lessons learned were rarely permanent. Human nature, even aboard a pirate ship, tend to forget slowly, and tomorrow inevitably brings similar arguments, small injuries, and mild chaos. Disease, of course, continued its quiet march. Scurvy, dysentery, and the occasional tropical fever swept through crews with a persistence that was remarkable only for its inevitability. Remedies were, as always, minimal. A touch of citrus if available, a handful of herbs, or a generous dose of rum. The effectiveness varied, but the rituals themselves offered a gentle comfort, a sense that action was being taken, even if the outcome was grimly predictable. Pirate ships were also prone to accidents that were, in retrospect, almost charming in their absurdity. A rope might snap at just the wrong moment, a sail might tear in an inconvenient place, or a barrel of rum could roll across the deck, knocking over men and supplies alike. These slow disasters were never spectacular. They were quiet, irritating, and unavoidable, the kind of minor catastrophes that lull the mind into a gentle acceptance of life's unpredictability. Weather continued its role as a slow, persistent companion. Storms, wind, and waves dictated the tempo of life aboard ship. Even minor changes could disrupt routines, make chores more difficult, and increase discomfort. But there was a strange comfort in these patterns. The sea moved predictably, the ship responded predictably, and the humans aboard, whether they liked it or not, adapted slowly, methodically, and with resigned patience. Pirate social life remained a mixture of camaraderie and tension. Shared misery created bonds, while petty rivalries ensured that life was never completely dull. Arguments over treasure, rank, and food persisted, punctuated by brief moments of quiet humor, minor pranks, and occasional storytelling. The combination of boredom, discomfort, and small pleasures created a rhythm that, while exhausting, was strangely hypnotic when recounted in a calm voice late at night. Leisure, when it appeared, was subdued. Music, games, and storytelling offered brief reprieves from monotony, though always within the limits imposed by exhaustion, smell, and cramped quarters. Instruments were often improvised, and stories typically involved minor exaggerations of past raids or complaints about routine discomforts. Even these small distractions were soothing, offering gentle mental stimulation, without threatening the calm, hypnotic rhythm of life aboard ship. Pirates' habits were eccentric and inconsistent. Some were obsessed with small details, polishing weapons, arranging hammocks, or performing minor rituals. Others embraced chaos, leaving tools, food, and clothing scattered around the ship. The resulting contrast created a slow-moving drama, one that provided endless material for quiet reflection and gentle amusement. Nighttime brought the familiar cycle of low-energy tension. Watches continued, minor injuries persisted, and the gentle rocking of the ship was punctuated by occasional curses, groans, or complaints. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and intermittent. Yet, for those who could find a comfortable spot, there was also a soothing rhythm in the sound of waves, the low murmur of human activity, and the faint creak of timbers. And so, as darkness settles and the crew drifts into hammocks, we find ourselves in a landscape of minor disasters, petty squabbles, and gentle misfortune. Life aboard a pirate ship is tedious, uncomfortable, and occasionally absurd, but also strangely hypnotic when observed from a quiet distance. The small dramas, the slow-moving chaos, and the gentle rhythm of routine all combine to create a unique, sleep-friendly tapestry of historical misery. Would you have joined in the raids, participated in a mutiny, or quietly survived in the background, nursing bruises and avoiding arguments? Drift into the comments and imagine yourself aboard this ship, hammocks swaying, sails creaking, and the endless horizon stretching quietly before you. If you're settled in and the gentle sway of the ship is echoing in your imagination, let's drift a little deeper into the world of pirates. Not the big dramatic raids or glorious battles, but the slower, quieter, and often absurd side of life at sea. The kind of life where minor rivalries, small mistakes, and petty frustrations are the most persistent companions. It's not thrilling, it's not heroic, but it is perfectly suited for an evening of quiet reflection or sleep. Pirate crews were, naturally, composed of men with very strong opinions about very small things. Who should sleep next to the captain? Who got the last ration of meat? Whose turn was it to clean the deck? Arguments over such trivial matters could stretch on for hours, punctuated by sighs, muttered curses, an occasional thrown object, a mop, a rope coil, or a particularly stubborn barrel. These small disputes were rarely resolved decisively. Instead, they lingered, simmering just below the surface, coloring every interaction and creating a gentle, persistent tension that never fully erupted. The quartermaster, in particular, held a unique position in these subtle power struggles. Responsible for supplies, rations, and the equitable division of loot, he was both respected and quietly feared. A slight miscalculation in food distribution could spark whispers that might eventually lead to a minor mutiny, or at least a day of sullen complaints. Pirates were remarkably sensitive to perceived slights, and a miscounted coin or a slightly smaller ration could become the basis for hours of low-level drama. Life aboard ship was also a series of small, preventable mishaps that somehow never seemed to be prevented. Ropes would fray, sails would tear, and barrels would tip over at exactly the wrong moment. Men would slip on wet decks, stub their toes, or catch their fingers in moving rigging. Injuries were frequent, but rarely serious enough to remove someone from duty entirely. The result was a slow, ongoing pattern of discomfort and mild chaos that, when described softly, becomes oddly hypnotic. Pirate rivalries extended beyond rations and tools. Personal slights, perceived insults, and jealousy over small successes contributed to the social texture of life at sea. One man might be praised for a clever maneuver during a raid, while another seated quietly, convinced he deserved the credit. Arguments could stretch into the night, conducted in low murmurs so as not to wake the captain, or in louder outbursts that might earn a quick reprimand, or a splash of seawater over the deck. These rivalries were minor, rarely violent, and often resolved only by exhaustion or distraction, yet they formed a steady background rhythm to life aboard ship. Food, predictably, remained a constant source of frustration. Salted meat could be hard, rancid, or crawling with tiny insects. Hardtack was as reliable as it was unpleasant, often requiring significant chewing effort. Or, in the case of particularly tough biscuits, a small hammer. Fresh water was scarce, often stale and occasionally bitter. Yet pirates adapted. They complained, argued, and sometimes went hungry, but they survived. The daily struggle with provisions created a slow, predictable cycle of frustration and adaptation, which, when imagined quietly, is strangely relaxing. Minor injuries were another constant companion. Cuts, bruises, rope burns, and smashed fingers were routine. Treatment was basic. A pinch of alcohol, a whisper of herbal remedy, and a healthy dose of patience. More serious injuries might require an improvised surgical procedure, often performed by someone with little medical knowledge but a great deal of confidence. The results were uneven, but the ritual itself, washing hands poorly, muttering prayers, and working quickly, added a gentle, hypnotic rhythm to daily life. Pirates also had unusual personal habits, many of which clashed subtly with those of their shipmates. Some men insisted on extreme tidiness, polishing their cutlasses daily, arranging hammocks in precise order, and keeping personal items meticulously organized. Others embraced chaos completely, leaving clothing, tools, and food scraps scattered across the deck. The resulting environment was simultaneously irritating and amusing, a slow-moving comedy of mismatched personalities that drifted through every day, unnoticed by the outside world. The weather continued its subtle dominance over life at sea. Sun, wind, and rain dictated everything. Work schedules, sleeping arrangements, and the likelihood of minor accidents. Storms are particularly tedious, requiring repeated adjustments to sails, ropes, and masts, often accompanied by slipping, shouting, and bruised egos. Minor storms caused frustration. Major storms required endurance, cleverness, and, occasionally, an acceptance of minor tragedy. Yet even the storms, as inconvenient as they were, contributed to the hypnotic rhythm of life aboard a ship, swaying gently as the vessel creaked and groaned. Pirate superstitions persisted, gently guiding behavior even in the most mundane circumstances. Avoiding certain actions, carrying charms, or performing rituals was a slow, methodical way of coping with uncertainty. Stepping on a particular spot, whistling at the wrong moment, or sailing on an unlucky day could provoke quiet anxiety, careful observation, and mild rearrangements of daily routine. These superstitions offered structure to life that otherwise had very little, creating a slow-moving rhythm that became comforting over time. Nighttime aboard ship brought its own challenges. Watches continued, Arguments lingered in whispers, and the occasional accident punctuated the darkness. Yet sleep was always present, a necessary adaptation to exhaustion, monotony, and mild chaos. Hammocks swayed gently, the deck creaked softly, and the distant sound of waves provided a continuous, hypnotic lull. Even in discomfort, humans adapt. Pirates, despite lice, stink, and minor injuries, learn to find small pockets of rest amid the endless routine. Rivalries, of course, could erupt in minor acts of sabotage. A rope might be intentionally loosened, a barrel moved to the wrong spot, or food secretly withheld. These actions rarely caused serious harm, but added a layer of slow tension, a background of mild anxiety and subtle amusement. The perpetrators rarely faced serious consequences. The crew's attention was divided, the captain often distracted, and the quartermaster usually too busy counting rations to notice. Pirate humor was quiet, dry, and often self-directed. Jokes about injuries, the terrible food, or the smell of fellow sailors punctuated long days. Laughter was rarely loud. It emerged in small bursts, in whispered commentary, or in the subtle rolling of the eyes. These small moments of levity were gentle, fleeting, and just enough to relieve the monotony of extended voyages. Even in their chaos, pirates demonstrated remarkable ingenuity, improvised repairs, clever strategies to handle storms, and creative methods to stretch food or clean hammocks reflected human adaptability. These solutions were rarely elegant, often risky, and occasionally disastrous, but they sufficed, and the slow, step-by-step problem-solving process added a gentle rhythm to the day, a subtle progression that could soothe the mind when described softly. Minor injuries, rivalries, and misadventures combined to create an endless cycle of small events. Each day blended into the next, a slightly wet deck, a slightly bitter meal, a slightly bruised ego. Nothing was catastrophic, nothing was dramatic. Everything was slightly inconvenient, slightly painful, and slightly absurd. And yet, these small irritations formed the steady heartbeat of life aboard ship, a rhythm so gentle it can be strangely hypnotic when imagined quietly. Pirates' personal quirks continue to shape daily life. Some men were meticulous about minor rituals, insisting on specific seating arrangements, particular tools at the ready, or exact positioning of hammocks. Others were chaotic, moving items randomly, spilling food, or leaving ropes tangled for no particular reason. The combination of order and disorder created a slow, amusing tension, one that persisted quietly day after day. Even the pursuit of treasure became a slow, deliberate exercise in patience. Searching for loot required hours of preparation, careful observation, and repeated argument over minor details. Maps might be read incorrectly, directions misinterpreted, or sails misaligned. The minor failures accumulated, forming a gentle narrative of slow frustration, minor adjustments, and occasional, fleeting triumph. And so, as the day fades into night, we find the pirate ship awash in subtle drama. Minor rivalries, petty frustrations, small injuries, and gentle superstitions continue their slow, hypnotic cycle. The crew moves through the evening, quietly tending to chores, whispering complaints, and preparing for the night. Hammocks sway gently, sails flap in the wind, and the smell of salt, sweat, and slightly rancid food drifts lazily across the deck. If you were aboard this ship, would you have been meticulous and organized, quietly managing supplies and minor disputes? Or would you have embraced chaos, letting small rivalries unfold around you while quietly surviving another day? Imagine yourself among the hammocks, the slow sway of the ship, and the persistent, gentle chaos, and share your thoughts softly in the comments. If you're settled comfortably, let's drift into a quieter, more reflective side of pirate life, the moments when the crew wasn't bailing water, arguing over rations, or nursing bruises. These were rare, gentle interludes filled with music, storytelling, and small amusements, though, of course, still tinged with discomfort, fatigue, and that ever-present layer of grime. Leisure aboard a pirate ship was, naturally, very different from what most people today might imagine. There were no hammocks with soft sheets, no tea in delicate cups, and no soft chairs. Instead, leisure involved whatever small comforts could be wrung from the chaotic environment. A cracked drum, a broken flute, or the simple pleasure of swapping stories while the ship creaked and swayed beneath you. Even sitting quietly on a wet deck could be considered a luxury, if you didn't mind the smell of salt, sweat, and slightly rancid provisions. Storytelling was perhaps the most common form of entertainment. Tales of previous raids, near misses, or clever escapes were recounted in soft voices, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes understated. These stories were as much about creating a gentle, shared rhythm as they were about impressing the listener. A pirate might speak slowly of how he outsmarted a merchant ship, leaving out the minor detail that he fell overboard twice and lost half his loot in the process. It was a soft cadence, the repetition, and the subtle humor that kept the audience engaged while also gently lulling them toward sleep. Music, when it appeared, was similarly subdued. Improvised instruments, cobbled together from barrels, string, or scraps of metal, produced rough, unpolished melodies. A sailor might drum softly on a cask, another strum a makeshift lute, and somewhere nearby, someone would quietly hum a tune they had learned in childhood. The result was not a concert, but a slow, irregular rhythm that drifted to the hammocks and across the deck, blending with the constant creak of timbers and the gentle slap of waves. Pirates also found amusement in minor pranks and mischief. A rope tied too tightly, a hammock nudged slightly off balance, or a bucket of water quietly tipped over could provoke laughter or quiet exasperation from the unsuspecting victim. These acts of subtle chaos were rarely cruel, though occasionally they resulted in minor bruises or wet clothing. They were, in a way, an outlet for creativity in a life otherwise constrained by discomfort, monotony, and the persistent demands of survival. Leisure often blended seamlessly with reflection. Pirates would quietly ponder the sea, the horizon stretching endlessly before them, and the rhythm of life aboard ship. They might think of distant homes, missed meals, or opportunities lost in minor accidents or misjudgments. These moments of quiet contemplation were often punctuated by the soft sound of waves and the creak of the vessel, creating a gentle, hypnotic lull that carried the mind slowly toward rest. Even meals during leisure time carried subtle dramas. A piece of meat might be shared, but only after a careful negotiation of space, rank, and timing. A hard biscuit could become the center of a quiet dispute, or a slightly bitter sip of water could inspire muttered complaints. The result was not chaos, exactly, but a slow, simmering rhythm of minor frustrations punctuated by small triumphs, like finally getting a hammock position exactly right or finding a corner of the deck free of insects for a brief nap. Minor misfortunes were never far away. A sudden spill of a food barrel, a rope snapping in the wrong place, or the unexpected arrival of bad weather could interrupt even the gentlest moments. Pirates had learned to adapt, accepting these minor catastrophes with sigh, a muttered curse, and a slow, deliberate correction. The predictability of these small disasters, occurring day after day, week after week, created a rhythm that was both monotonous and oddly soothing. Social life during leisure was also marked by subtle power dynamics. Pirates might gather to discuss previous raids, argue over treasure, or debate minor rules of the ship. The captain and quartermaster maintained quiet authority, their words often shaping conversations and disputes in subtle ways. Arguments rarely escalated into true violence during these quieter moments. They were instead a slow negotiation of personality, pride, and minor grievances. Observing these dynamics from a distance, it's easy to appreciate the gentle ebb and flow of social life aboard a pirate ship, even amidst grime and exhaustion. Pirate superstitions continued to shape even these moments. A sailor might refuse to start a story on a particular day, or insist on sitting in a specific spot to avoid bad luck. Such practices offered comfort, however illusory, providing a predictable structure in an otherwise chaotic environment. Over time, the repetition of these rituals contributed to the hypnotic cadence of daily life, subtly reinforcing the gentle rhythm that carried pirates through each long, monotonous day. Rest, when it occurred, was fragile but persistent. Hammocks swayed above the creaking deck, and exhausted pirates would close their eyes, listening to the low murmur conversation, the slap of waves, and the occasional rustle of loose rigging. Sleep was rarely uninterrupted, but it was present, even brief. Fitful periods of rest offer relief from the constant minor discomforts, wet clothing, persistent lice, cramped hammocks, and the smell of unwashed bodies. Pirates' personal quirks added texture to these quiet moments. Some men meticulously arranged personal items, ensuring their hammocks, tools, and food supplies were in precise order. Others embraced chaos, scattering belongings and leaving ropes and barrels in unpredictable places. The interaction of order and disorder created a slow, amusing tension that persisted quietly throughout the ship, never rising to true conflict, but always present enough to be noticed. Leisure activities also included minor competitions. Arm wrestling, mock sword fights with blunt instruments, and small games of chance allowed pirates to test skill, strength, and luck without venturing into full-blown chaos. These competitions were never decisive or particularly fair, but they offered small pleasures, subtle challenges, and gentle distractions from the relentless monotony of daily life. Even mundane tasks became slightly ceremonial. Cleaning a deck, patching a sail, or organizing hammocks was performed with quiet diligence, occasionally punctuated by minor mistakes or accidents. The slow, repetitive nature of these chores, when observed calmly, contributed to the hypnotic rhythm of life at sea. There was a sense of continuity, a steady heartbeat that, while not particularly exciting, provided comfort in its predictability. Pirate storytelling, music, minor pranks, and personal quirks all intertwined to create a layered, gentle environment. The ship swayed, timbers creaked, sails flapped softly, and the ever-present smell of salt, sweat, and slightly rancid food drifted across the deck. These small details, combined with subtle dramas, minor rivalries, and gentle routines, formed the slow, hypnotic rhythm that defined life aboard a pirate ship, a rhythm both exhausting and oddly soothing. As night settled, pirates would find quiet corners of the deck or hammock spaces where they could rest, meditate, or reflect. Some whispered prayers to see gods or superstitions. Others quietly recounted stories or imagined distant lands. All were united by the slow, persistent rhythm of minor discomforts, petty rivalries, and gentle amusement, a pattern that, in its repetitive monotony, became strangely comforting when recounted softly. If you were aboard this ship, would you spend your evenings quietly playing games, telling stories, or observing the subtle dramas unfold? Imagine yourself swaying gently in a hammock, listening to the soft slap of waves, and drifting into reflection as minor mishaps occur quietly around you. Share your thoughts in the comments, softly imagining life aboard this slow-moving, gently chaotic vessel. If you're comfortably settled, let's continue our gentle exploration of life at sea, this time focusing on the small, often overlooked behaviors that structure a pirate's day, the rituals, superstitions, and tiny personal victories that, in their quiet repetition, gave the long, monotonous days a sense of rhythm. Pirates, perhaps unsurprisingly, were profoundly superstitious. The open sea, unpredictable weather, and persistent misfortunes encouraged them to cling to small, often absurd beliefs. Stepping on the wrong plank, whistling at the wrong time, or handling a rope backwards might be enough to invite disaster. These superstitions were taken seriously, at least in a quiet, low-energy way, influencing the mundane actions of the crew, from minor chores to the arrangement of hammocks. The rituals associated with these beliefs were subtle and persistent. A sailor might touch a particular charm before climbing the rigging, arrange tools in precise order before handling sails, or recite a half-remembered prayer before distributing rations. The captain might insist on raising the flag in a specific way, while the quartermaster observed carefully, ensuring no deviation that could be construed as unlucky. These repeated low-energy practices provided comfort, a sense that, even in the unpredictable chaos of life at sea, there existed a degree of order and control. Small victories punctuated these routines. Successfully tying a knot, managing to balance a barrel without incident, or positioning a hammock so that it did not swing too violently became quietly celebrated achievements. These accomplishments, though minor to an outside observer, were significant to the sailors, providing fleeting satisfaction and a gentle sense of mastery over their immediate environment. Even the simplest triumph, a meal not spoiled, a minor repair completed without incident, was cause for subdued pride. Superstitions also extended to the handling of treasure. Pirates were careful not to touch coins in the wrong order, avoid particular arrangements of loot, or keep certain items separate for fear of invoking misfortune. These behaviors were rarely rational, sometimes contradictory, but always persistent. Observing these rituals quietly, day after day, created a hypnotic rhythm, reinforcing the slow, repetitive patterns that define life aboard the ship. Pirates' personal routines became intertwined with these superstitions. Some sailors meticulously polished weapons, ensured their tools were arranged in precise order, and performed minor cleaning rituals. Others embraced disorder, leaving ropes tangled, hammocks askew, and supplies scattered. The contrast between order and chaos created subtle tension, gently amusing to any observer. This interplay between careful ritual and messy reality shaped the environment, giving each day structure and texture. Even small misfortunes could be transformed into ritualized events. A spilled bucket, a torn sail, or a stubbed toe might be acknowledged with a whispered apology, a brief charm, or a quietly recited prayer. The minor accident, far from causing panic, became part of the day's rhythm, a predictable interruption that reinforced the hypnotic cadence of life aboard ship. Leisure time continued to be quiet, gentle, and structured by these rituals. Storytelling, music, and subtle games punctuated long hours of monotony. Tales of past raids were recounted in measured tones, carefully avoiding overly dramatic flourishes, while songs were played on imperfect instruments. These activities were not thrilling. They were soothing, comforting, and repetitive, offering mental stimulation without disturbing the slow, sleepy rhythm of daily life. Small competitions persisted, often blending leisure with ritual. Arm wrestling, mock sword fights with blunt instruments, or simple games of chance provided minor entertainment. The outcomes were rarely decisive or fair, but they offered a subtle sense of accomplishment and a gentle interruption to routine duties. These competitions reinforced the social hierarchy in a calm, understated way, creating a continuous, low-energy interplay of personalities and minor rivalries. The persistence of illness and minor injury continued to shape daily life. Scurvy, dysentery, and rope burns reminded sailors of their vulnerability, while small remedies, herbs, citrus, rum, offered limited relief. Even ineffective treatments provided psychological comfort, reinforcing the ritualized approach to daily existence. Pirates accepted these slow, creeping adversities with quiet patience, learning to integrate minor discomforts into the subtle, hypnotic rhythm of life at sea. Even the ship itself became a participant in these rituals. Sails were raised and lowered in particular sequences, ropes checked in carefully repeated patterns, and barrels arranged methodically to prevent tipping. These small, repetitive actions, combined with persistent sway of the vessel and the ambient creak of timbers, created a continuous, soothing rhythm. The ship's motions, while sometimes inconvenient, contributed to the hypnotic cadence that carried sailors through long, monotonous days. Nighttime brought further opportunities for ritualized behavior. Watches continued quietly. Minor disputes were resolved through whispered negotiation, and personal routines were performed in hammocks or corners of the deck. Superstitious prayers, careful positioning of belongings, and quiet reflection all combined to provide structure and comfort, even as illness, fatigue, and minor accidents persisted. The gentle sway of the ship, the soft sounds of waves, and the occasional distant murmur of human activity reinforced the hypnotic atmosphere, lulling sailors toward fitful rest. Personal reflection and small acts of self-care also became quiet rituals. A sailor might inspect a weapon, polish a tool, or reorganize a hammock before sleep. These acts, though minor, reinforce a sense of agency in an environment largely defined by discomfort, fatigue, and low-level chaos. Each ritual, repeated quietly over weeks or months, became part of the hypnotic rhythm of life aboard ship, offering continuity, comfort, and subtle mastery over one's immediate surroundings. Even small disagreements could be ritualized. Arguments over rations, sleeping arrangements, or minor grievances were conducted in measured, low-energy tones, often resolved by exhaustion or distraction rather than confrontation. This quiet, persistent negotiation of social order became another layer of routine, another gentle rhythm that helped maintain equilibrium aboard a vessel defined by discomfort, monotony, and subtle tension. Pirates also found solace in small acts of generosity or cooperation, sharing a meager ration, assisting a sailor with a minor injury, or helping to balance a barrel on deck became small victories in social harmony. These moments were subtle, fleeting, and quietly celebrated, reinforcing bonds between crew members and providing minor relief from the persistent fatigue, discomfort, and slow erosion of morale. The combination of superstition, ritual, leisure, and minor victories created a continuous, hypnotic cadence. Sailors moved through their duties, disputes, and small amusements with quiet, persistent rhythm, their actions shaped by habit, belief, and subtle social pressure. Even accidents, illness, and fatigue were absorbed into this pattern, becoming part of the day's steady, repetitive motion. Observing this, even in imagination, offers a soothing, reflective lens into life at sea. As night deepened, pirates settled into hammocks, whispered prayers, and quiet reflection. The sway of the ship, the soft creak of timbers, and the low hum of conversation combined to create an atmosphere both hypnotic and reassuring. Minor injuries, lingering illness, petty disputes, and subtle victories persisted quietly beneath the surface, forming a gentle, continuous rhythm that carried sailors toward rest. If you were aboard this ship, how would you have participated in the rituals, superstitions, and small personal victories that structured each day? Would you have been meticulous, ensuring everything was in order, or embrace chaos, finding comfort in the ebb and flow of minor disasters? Imagine yourself gently swaying in a hammock, listening to the soft rhythm of waves and creaking timbers, and share your thoughts quietly in the comments. If you're comfortably settled, let's drift a little closer to the moments of minor action aboard a pirate ship, raids that were never particularly glamorous, navigational errors that caused gentle anxiety, and those small catastrophes that punctuated life at sea with low-level tension. These are not the dramatic, swashbuckling adventures of novels, but the slow, persistent, subtly amusing realities of pirate life. Raids, of course, were the occasional highlight in a monotonous routine, though the excitement was tempered by exhaustion, poor planning, and human error. Spotting a merchant ship on the horizon would trigger a low-energy flurry of preparation. Ropes adjusted, sails hoisted, cannons checked, and men reminded quietly, not yelled at, because raising one's voice was effortful in itself, that they were expected to act without tripping or dropping supplies. Even the simplest orders could be misunderstood, resulting in minor accidents. A sailor tumbling over a rope, a barrel tipping over at the wrong moment, or a gunpowder keg sliding slightly out of place. These events, while small, create a slow rhythm of tension and minor chaos, perfect for quiet reflection or a gentle drift toward sleep. Boarding another ship was similarly unglamorous. Pirates climbed wet ropes carefully, balancing on slippery decks while trying not to appear weak in front of their peers. Fights rarely resembled the dramatic duels of fiction. Instead, they were chaotic, clumsy, and often uncoordinated, producing bruises, scratches, and occasional falls overboard. Success in these minor skirmishes often relied more on endurance, stubbornness, and luck than skill or strategy. Even the victorious often left the deck exhausted, wet, and slightly battered. Hardly the triumphant scene a storybook might suggest. Loot, when acquired, added to the low-energy drama. Coins, trinkets, and occasional small treasures had to be counted, divided, and stashed. This process was rarely efficient. Disputes over a miscounted coin, a dropped gem, or a spilled sack of silver could linger for hours, resolved only by fatigue or distraction. Even the quartermaster, charged with overseeing fairness, was not immune to human error, occasionally misplacing a few coins or arguing quietly over perceived slights. The result was a slow, persistent tension, both frustrating and oddly comforting in its predictability. Navigation was another source of gentle, ongoing anxiety. Compass errors, misread maps, and miscalculated courses were common. Sailors would squint at charts, adjust sails cautiously, and whisper possible routes while the ship swayed beneath them. Mistakes were rarely disastrous. More often, they resulted in minor detours, increased fatigue, and subtle complaints. A voyage might take hours longer than expected, or a ship could drift slightly off course, only to be corrected after a slow, deliberate recalibration. This constant, low-energy problem-solving contributed to the hypnotic rhythm of life at sea. Weather, predictably, added its own low-level drama. Sudden gusts, minor storms, or unexpected squalls require repeated adjustments to sails, ropes, and equipment. Even a slight shift in wind direction could send a rope flailing, a sail tearing partially, or a barrel rolling across the deck. Sailors responded with methodical calm, tightening knots, adjusting rigging, and occasionally muttering quietly under their breath. The subtle tension of weather-induced errors was never overwhelming, but it punctuated daily routines with enough unpredictability to maintain a gentle, hypnotic cadence. Minor catastrophes were woven into almost every action. A misjudged swing of a rope could knock over supplies, a poorly timed step could send someone slipping across the deck, or a cannon might misfire slightly. These events were rarely serious, but they were persistent, repetitive, and mildly frustrating. Pirates, habituated to these occurrences, responded with a sigh, a muted curse, and a slow correction. The predictability of these small misfortunes formed a quiet rhythm, one that shaped both the day and the psyche of the crew. Even meals during raids carried low-energy tension. Rations might be dropped, split unevenly, or contaminated by minor spills. Pirates would argue quietly, sometimes exchanging pointed glances or muttered complaints, but seldom erupting into outright conflict. Food was essential, but the process of preparing, distributing, and consuming it remained a subtle drama, reinforcing the steady cadence of discomfort and minor victories that defined life aboard ship. Personal quirks shaped responses to these raids and misadventures. Some sailors meticulously arranged tools and supplies, ensuring readiness for action. Others embraced disorder, leaving barrels, ropes, and personal belongings scattered across the deck. The interplay between organization and chaos created gentle friction, amusing to observe and comforting in its predictability. Each day, each raid, each minor error added layers to the ongoing rhythm of life at sea. Even quiet, small victories during raids were significant. Successfully tying a rope, managing to balance a barrel, or safely retrieving a piece of loot provided fleeting satisfaction. These minor achievements, although trivial to an outsider, became quietly celebrated moments, reinforcing morale and offering a subtle counterpoint to persistent discomforts, minor injuries, and low-level chaos that defined life aboard a pirate ship. Superstitions guided behavior subtly during these moments. A sailor might avoid walking on a particular plank, handle a coin in a specific order, or perform a small charm before lifting a sail. The rituals were often illogical, sometimes contradictory, but always persistent. They provided a sense of control and continuity, reinforcing a hypnotic cadence in an otherwise unpredictable environment. Even minor adherence to superstition became part of the quiet rhythm of daily life. Injuries, though rarely severe, continued to punctuate activities. Bruises, rope burns, stub toes, and scrapes occurred frequently during raids, navigation, and simple chores. Treatment was basic: a touch of rum, a whispered prayer, or a loosely tied bandage. Even when these remedies were insufficient, the rituals surrounding care provided comfort, structure, and subtle amusement, forming a gentle counterpoint to the ongoing minor catastrophes. The social hierarchy subtly shaped responses to these incidents. The captain and quartermaster observed carefully, guiding disputes, coordinating efforts, and maintaining order through quiet authority rather than loud command. Peer relationships, shaped by rivalry, loyalty, and occasional amusement, influenced the resolution of minor disagreements, the allocation of rations, and the management of supplies. The result was a low-energy, gently chaotic social ecosystem, endlessly fascinating in its slow, repetitive patterns. As night approached after a day of minor raids and subtle disasters, pirates returned to hammocks, quietly arranging possessions, whispering prayers, and reflecting on small victories or mishaps. The swaying of the ship, the creak of timbers, and the distant lapping of waves created a hypnotic backdrop, gently lulling them toward rest. Even persistent injuries, fatigue, and illness were absorbed into this quiet rhythm, forming the soft undercurrent of life aboard ship. If you were aboard this vessel, would you have been meticulous and cautious, quietly managing your tools and supplies to avoid misfortune? Or would you have embraced chaos, allowing small catastrophes to unfold around you while celebrating the minor victories that occurred naturally? Imagine yourself gently swaying in a hammock, the low hum of activity around you, and share your thoughts quietly in the comments. As we drift further into the slower rhythms of pirate life, it's impossible to ignore the persistent, gentle weight of fatigue and boredom. These were the invisible companions of every sailor, shaping days in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. While illness, minor accidents, and raids offer occasional distractions, the long stretches of monotony define life aboard a pirate ship more than any dramatic battle ever could. Fatigue set in slowly, accumulating hour by hour. Sailors woke early to tend sails, manage supplies, and perform minor repairs. Days were long, punctuated by repetitive chores and low-energy disputes over rations, hammocks, or minor slights. Physical exhaustion intertwined with mental strain. The constant vigilance required to avoid accidents, the slow processing of social friction, and the subtle anxiety that accompanied navigation errors and minor catastrophes. Over weeks and months, fatigue became a quiet, persistent companion, shaping behavior and responses to events both large and small. Boredom, equally pervasive, settled in like a soft fog. Hours stretched endlessly as pirates awaited their next destination, their next minor accident, or the next fleeting amusement. Some sought solace in storytelling, recounting past raids or exaggerated exploits in soft, measured tones. Others passed time with music, playing broken instruments, or improvising melodies that were never particularly harmonious, but always comforting in repetition. Leisure, though modest, provided relief, a quiet distraction from the monotony and fatigue that defined each day. The combination of fatigue and boredom contributed to subtle changes in morale. Minor disputes grew longer, complaints lingered in the air, and small frustrations accumulated. Sailors became more irritable, less patient, and occasionally inventive in creating minor pranks or mischief. These small acts of rebellion, though often trivial, offered relief in the unrelenting monotony, adding gentle texture to the otherwise slow-moving days. Even minor accomplishments, repairing a sail without incident, arranging a hammock perfectly, or successfully navigating a small section of treacherous water, provided fleeting satisfaction. These small victories were rarely celebrated loudly. Instead, they were absorbed quietly, forming gentle markers of progress in an otherwise monotonous environment. Their subtle significance reinforced the hypnotic rhythm of life at sea, reminding sailors that even amidst fatigue, illness, and minor disasters, human ingenuity persisted. Social dynamics continued their gentle sway. Rivalries simmered beneath the surface, punctuated by small disputes and quiet negotiations. The captain and quartermaster maintained low-energy authority, subtly guiding interactions and resolving conflicts without dramatic displays. Peer interactions, shaped by loyalty, irritation, and minor amusement, created a slow, persistent pattern of social engagement, further defining the rhythm of daily life. Superstitions and rituals persisted as anchors against the unrelenting boredom. Sailors touched charms, arranged tools, and recited prayers with predictable regularity. Even seemingly illogical or contradictory practices provided comfort, structure, and reassurance. Over time, these repeated behaviors became integral to the hypnotic cadence of life aboard ship, gently punctuating the slow passage of hours, days, and weeks. Nighttime offered partial reprieve. Hammocks swayed in gentle rhythm. Sails creaked softly, and the distant lap of waves created a soothing background. Minor injuries and persistent discomfort continued to hum quietly, absorbed into the steady rhythm of life. Sleep was fragile, often interrupted by small accidents or whispers of activity, but remained a constant, quietly restoring energy for another day of low-level chaos. The slow erosion of morale, fatigue, and boredom shaped decisions subtly. Sailors became inventive in minor pranks, quiet games, and small personal rituals. These behaviors were not particularly productive, heroic, or exciting, but they offered psychological relief, reinforcing the steady, hypnotic flow of life aboard ship. Even the smallest disruptions, spilled rations, minor disputes, or a rope fraying unexpectedly, were absorbed into this gentle rhythm, reinforcing patterns of adaptation and endurance. As you imagine yourself aboard this vessel, consider how persistent fatigue and boredom might shape your behavior. Would you find solace in ritual, storytelling, or minor personal victories? Or would you participate in quiet mischief, subtle pranks, and gentle disputes to break the monotony? Share your thoughts softly in the comments, letting your imagination drift with the swaying ship. Finally, as our journey through the subtle, hypnotic life of pirates draws to a close, it's time to reflect on the cumulative rhythm of these long, monotonous days. The minor injuries, small accidents, persistent illness, petty disputes, rituals, superstitions, and fleeting victories all combine to create a unique pattern, a rhythm that, while exhausting and uncomfortable in reality, becomes oddly soothing when imagined quietly from the comfort of a warm room. As the ship drifts onward in your mind, consider persistence required to endure life at sea. Pirates tolerated discomfort, monotony, and low-level chaos with a gentle patience that, in its repetition, became almost meditative. Each small act, from arranging hammocks to reciting prayers, contributed to a subtle, hypnotic cadence, creating a continuous, reassuring rhythm that carried them through weeks, months, and even years at sea. Even the most minor victories became quietly meaningful. Successfully balancing a barrel, tying a rope without incident, or navigating a treacherous stretch of water offered fleeting satisfaction, a reminder that even amidst monotony and discomfort, human ingenuity persisted. These small triumphs, though unremarkable by most measures, provided a sense of agency and continuity, reinforcing the quiet rhythm of daily life aboard ship. The ship itself played a crucial role in this hypnotic pattern. Its gentle sway, the creak of timbers, and the constant lap of waves created an ambient backdrop, a continuous soundscape that quietly guided the passage of time. Sailors adapted to this rhythm, allowing it to dictate the pace of work, rest, and leisure. The vessel became more than a means of transport. It was a participant in the slow, understated flow of life, contributing to the subtle, persistent cadence that defined existence at sea. Superstitions and rituals, minor as they may have seemed, provided structure and comfort. Whether arranging tools, performing small prayers, or observing long-held habits, these behaviors offered reassurance in an environment defined by unpredictability. Even mistakes and misfortunes were absorbed into the rhythm, reinforcing patterns of endurance, adaptation, and quiet reflection. As night deepened, pirates settled into hammocks, whispered prayers, and gentle contemplation. The sway of the ship, the soft creak of timbers, and the distant hum of activity created a hypnotic atmosphere, gently carrying sailors toward rest. Sleep, though fragile, arrived steadily, providing a brief respite from fatigue, minor injuries, illness, and low-level chaos. The cumulative effect of days, weeks, and months of repetitive motion, subtle social negotiation, and persistent endurance formed a quiet, reflective pattern, one that, when imagined softly, can lull the mind gently into relaxation. And so, as our journey comes to an end, consider the lessons of this gentle chaos. Life aboard a pirate ship was neither glamorous nor heroic in the traditional sense. It was slow, repetitive, uncomfortable, and occasionally absurd. Yet within its monotony existed a subtle rhythm, a hypnotic cadence of minor victories, low-level disasters, rituals, and reflection. Observing this quietly, allowing your mind to drift with the ship's sway, can provide an unusual form of comfort and contemplation. If you were aboard this ship, which rhythms would you have clung to most closely? The rituals, the small victories, the quiet pranks, or the gentle sway of the vessel itself? Imagine your presence among the hammocks and barrels, the faint scent of salt and sweat, and share your reflections softly in the comments. Thank you for drifting through this hypnotic, quietly chaotic world of pirates with me tonight. If you enjoyed this gentle exploration, consider leaving a like, sharing the video with a friend, and subscribing for more calm historical journeys. And remember, sometimes the smallest details, the creak of wood, the sway of a hammock, the whisper of waves, can teach us as much as the grandest adventures ever could. Drift well, and I'll see you for the next journey.